What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today, Tuesday, June 27th, 2023. I am your host, Sean Murphy. I am glad to be back. Let's talk about the NBA draft. A great one that the Pistons just had, getting Ausar Thompson at the 5th overall pick and Marcus Sasser later at the 25th overall pick. In my opinion, could potentially be one of the steals of this year's NBA draft. Obviously, the biggest one being Cam Whitmore. We'll talk about the Pistons and 15 other teams passing on him and what that looked like. But also, we'll talk about, what this means for the Pistons free agency and the rest of their offseason plans. How aggressive are they going to be? And what does this mean for our overall timeline? We'll talk about all that and more. And be sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell down below so you're not missing any of the latest and greatest content coming from Half Court. But also, tomorrow, we have a podcast with the GOAT, Rod Beard himself from the Detroit News, coming on to talk about all of this stuff in even deeper detail. So you're going to want to be tuned in for that. But with that, let's dive right into it, man. Ausar Thompson, in my opinion, was absolutely the right pick for the Pistons at 5. I think he is the perfect balance of upside as well as instant impact on both sides of the court. On the offensive end, I know we're focused on his shooting, and I'm confident that it can get there. If you look at his last few games in Overtime Elite, particularly in the Overtime Elite playoffs, he shot 40% from three. I'm not really sure what Overtime Elite stats actually are going to be relevant because, let's be honest, we don't really know about the legitimacy of Overtime Elite, but what we can see and what we do know is that the Thompson twins can play. We can see that these kids are freak athletes, both at 6'7", Ausar with a 7-foot wingspan, really stout on the defensive end. I know Amen's known for being the playmaker, but Ausar, whenever he was given the opportunity to do so, really impressed a lot of teams, the Pistons in particular, according to guys like Keith Langlos. And you look at what the Pistons are putting together, Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, Ausar Thompson, all long, versatile, can be that on the defensive end, but also the athleticism that can bring on the offensive end, the potential of the fast break, but also the ability that Cade Cunningham can have to make his teammates better. You're putting freak athletes and, selfless ball handlers, people who can be playmakers alongside Cade. You're just opening the potential and the floodgates for what could potentially be a pick your poison offense. With Ausar Thompson, obviously, I don't think he's going to start right away. I think if he's going to start, he's going to have to earn that over time. But I think right away, he's a guy that could potentially be an Andre Iguodala type player, where he's a solid defensive stout guy, fills in a lot of the blanks, does a lot of the Swiss Army knife things on the basketball court that you need in order to win championships, that you need in order to get deep into the playoffs. I mean, the Denver Nuggets, yes, Nikola Jokic was the reason that they got there. Jamal Murray was a big reason that they were able to get to the finals. But guys like Christian Brown, Bruce Brown, guys like Aaron Gordon, who was an all-star in his own right, or an all-star level talent, but then decided to put that to the side, go to Denver, put his ego away, accept the fact that he's not going to be a number one player on a championship team, but he can be a number 3. And man, was Aaron Gordon that and then some for Denver. And if Ausar Thompson can come in, have an impact and be a high quality defensive player, which I think he will be, and then he can eventually grow his shot. I mean, this is another player who could potentially be an all-star. And this is a guy who, at the very least, is going to be a solid NBA player for years to come, in my opinion. I think it was an absolute slam dunk type pick from the Pistons. I love what Ausar Thompson brings right away, but also he fits right into that, right into what Troy Weaver talks about of having high quality, high character guys. And if you're going to bet on anybody, you're going to bet on kids like Ausar Thompson, who work his ass off, who lives in the gym, who's passionate about basketball. And yes, we don't know about the competition level and the quality of that from Overtime Elite, but what we do know is that for the last couple of years, they've been learning how to be pros. They've been in really high quality facilities, focusing solely on basketball, only training basketball, perfecting their bodies and coming in ready to be pros. And so they do have that advantage over a lot of guys who went to college. And yes, it was a risk, but at the same time, they're coming in and they're top 5 picks and they're in prime position to both make impacts for their teams, Amen and Ausar respectively. And I think Ausar especially is in a position to thrive in Detroit. And a lot of people, including Detroit, reportedly had Ausar over Amen in their scouting. So it'll be interesting to see which team ends up getting the better of the two twins. But also, that was not the only move that the Pistons made in the draft. They went and got Marcus Sasser at 25th overall from Houston. They traded up from 31, which, I knew they would. We talked about it on the podcast. There was no chance in hell they were drafting at 31. We knew Troy Weaver was going to try to do something, and something he did. He traded the 31st pick along with 2 other second-round picks to the Boston Celtics in exchange for the rights to draft Marcus Sasser. And this is a guy, 22 years old out of Houston, the number one, scorer, the number one scorer on a team that was the number one offense in the college basketball nation. He was a remarkable player for them over the last few years. His ability as a point guard to, to steady the ship, to be an outside threat, to stretch the floor, but also the fact that this is a ball hawk on the defensive end, a guy for all intents and purposes plays cornerback, but on a basketball court. This is a guy who, despite being at 6'2", can be a really effective point to the attack defender, is a guy who has high potential to be a really good backup point guard for years to come. And when I look at Marcus Sasser, man, I see shades of Will Bynum, Lindsey Hunter, perhaps even some Carlos Arroyo, if I dare be so bold and brash. I love backup point guards, man. Just looking at what Marcus Sasser brings to this team day one, for all intents and purposes, Troy Weaver said they think he can have a role on this team day one. And with that, it kind of makes you begin to question what happens with guys like Killian Hayes. Where is their future in this team, specifically with guys like Marcus Sasser? I mean, let's not be shy about it. The Pistons just drafted yet another point guard. They are not afraid to go and get players they like, even if it's a position that they have addressed, even if they've addressed before. And so, yeah, sure, that also opens up the opportunity for Killian to maybe, play more of a 2 or maybe 3. He doesn't necessarily have to play, the 1, but at the same time, in order for Killian to be effective off ball, he has to show that he can shoot. And that's a thing that we just haven't seen Killian put together on a consistent basis. I mean, there was about a month where Killian looked awesome last year, and then he went to Paris, and he never was the same after that. And it's a lot of the mental things. I mean, let's just say this. If you put Marcus Sasser in Killian Hayes' body and gave him the same physical intangibles that Killian Hayes has, that'd be an all-star. Flat out. Marcus Sasser is the 25th pick because he's 6'2", because he's a 4-year guy out of college. He's going to be really solid. He's not going to be, an amazing all-star. He's not going to be a starter on a good NBA team. But you know what he can be? He could be a really, really reliable backup point guard. He can be a spark plug off the bench, a guy who can come in and make impact and can help you win games on a team that has good young talent, and help come in and be competitive, but also have that maturity. A guy who's a rookie that isn't necessarily like other rookies. Yes, a lot of the rookies are these, one and done guys, and you generally look at those guys more highly because you think that they have more room to grow, and because they come in and, obviously the ones who are the best are going to, come out their first year. But in reality, a lot of really good players have been 4-year players. Kyle Kuzma was a guy who stayed multiple years in college. Duncan Robinson was a guy who graduated from U of M. There's a lot of guys in this league that graduated and stayed all 4. I mean, Draymond Green. I'm not saying he's going to be on the level of those guys, but what I am saying is it is an asset to a young team to have a guy that comes in who can be instantly ready to help you space the floor, that can bring pressure on the defensive end, and know that you have more guys, that you can bring off the bench that are going to bring impact, that are going to bring effort. This team just got deeper. It got more athletic. It got better on both sides of the court, but also it maintained the strong locker room presence that they have. And I think, at the very least, like with Marcus Sasser, it made you question, like with the amount of guards that they had, like what potential moves could be made. One move that went under the radar, RJ Hampton was waived this past weekend. That's per Shams Charania and confirmed by Pistons PR. And in my opinion, this could potentially be a move that starts a series of moves because the free agency period is coming up. And with that opens up a roster spot for the Pistons to potentially acquire a contract. I mean, we just saw the Utah Jazz get John Collins in exchange for Rudy Gay. If they can get John Collins for Rudy Gay, what can the Pistons get this offseason, because the reason why these types of trades are going to happen is because of the collective bargaining agreement. This specifically, this second apron, aka a hard salary cap in the NBA. If you meet this apron, if you get to this money level, you are locked the into what you're doing. This is your team going forward, flat out, full stop. And for teams like the Hawks, who have to get under that apron, they have to make sure they're not in the luxury tax because they're not good enough to be in the luxury tax. There are other teams that are going to have to shed salary this offseason. And the Pistons are a candidate of potentially getting decent players or expiring contracts and potentially getting assets alongside it. But also, you can potentially go for really solid players as well. I mean, there's the likes of guys like Austin Reeves is a really solid young player who's a restricted free agent. But there's also the guy reported, the most heavily reported, Cam Johnson from the Brooklyn Nets, restricted free agent, but trying to warn y'all for the last few months that he would be a target. But anyway, I think he is a great fit for this Pistons roster. Obviously, he brings exactly what we need, defense and shooting, as well as high character, high motor basketball, a guy who's played under Monty Williams in Phoenix and, can come in and know that system, help implement it, but also be in a good position where he's both youthful enough, at 27, where he can relate with these guys, but at the same time, he has experience. He's been to the finals. He's been in disappointing playoff runs, and he's been in thriving ones as well. He's been in locker rooms with guys like Chris Paul, Devin Booker. And so when you have that type of acumen, when you have that type of basketball character, that's a guy that you want, and that's a guy that you would pay premium money to go get. And as far as what the Brooklyn Nets do, I know that more than likely it's going to be a situation where, they want to try and match an offer sheet and bring him back. I mean, Mikal Bridges reportedly wants him back. And if that is indeed the case, and, obviously that'd be a bummer. However, I don't think that's necessarily written in stone that that's going to happen, because, I mean, if you look at the construction of Brooklyn's roster, they're going to need to make major changes, because just like Detroit has an abundance of bigs, Brooklyn has an abundance of wings. They need size, they need length, they need bigs, they need people who can bang in the post. And so when you're looking at what the Pistons could potentially do, what types of trades could potentially happen, you put the dots together, you could potentially look at some form of sign and trade with Cam Johnson to Detroit that still keeps Brooklyn competitive, which is exactly what they're looking to do, because they don't own their own draft picks, and so they have no choice but to field a good roster. So they could potentially get a guy like Marvin Bagley, who could come in, potentially play, in the pick and roll with Mikal Bridges when healthy, and if he's not healthy, then he's an expiring contract in it, either this offseason or next. And so that's a guy that you can, easily get off your books. And, that's exactly the type of move, whether it's also, they can include Bojan Bogdanovic. That would also really be a solid player to put alongside Mikal Bridges. Perhaps even, James Wiseman, if they want to go a youthful competitive movement. So there's a lot of different directions that Detroit could go. There's a lot of other players that could potentially be on the market that we don't even know about because of the second apron and because of the collective bargaining agreement. If there's ever going to be a general manager that's going to sniff out those deals, that's going to be aggressive in this time, it's Troy Weaver. I mean, you brought in Monty Williams. You're going to take your time. You have young talent in-house that you believe in, that you can really get some solid playing time to. But at the same time, with the salary cap space that you have, but also with the direction the league is going with this collective bargaining agreement, I think you're in prime position to add a really good player this offseason. Whether that's a solid role player, whether that's a starter, we'll see. But ultimately, I would love to know what you guys think. Who would you love to see in a Pistons uniform this offseason? Let me know in the comment section down below. But also, be sure you're tuned into this channel so you don't miss any coverage for Summer League, as well as the free agency period. A lot of is about to go down, and you're not going to want to miss it here on From Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.